Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Dr. Mira Andrei. I'm a restoration specialist contracted by the National Heritage Commission of Romania. At the time of the outbreak, I had been living and working inside the old hill monastery of Sfântul Mihail for nearly 5 months. The monastery is perched high above the village of Poianil de Ios, near the northern border, remote, forested, steeped in mist and stories. It dates back to the 13th century, built first by Cistercians, then expanded under Orthodox rule in the 1600s. Since the early 2000s, it's been in partial restoration, converted into a combined museum, archive, and active convent housing a small order of Benedictine nuns. I wasn't supposed to be there in January. The winter restoration team usually rotated out by Christmas. But the project had fallen behind. Too many delicate frescoes, too much mildew from the previous year's flooding. I stayed behind with the nuns, the caretaker, and a skeleton staff of cultural workers. I needed the quiet. And that place, cold, stone-breathing, echoing with silence, it offered a strange kind of peace. The kind you don't recognize until it's gone. It started with a man at the gates. He was young, maybe 30, pale as old marble, with blood soaked into the front of his shearling coat. 2 villagers carried him up in a tractor cart, Nicolae, the mayor's cousin, and Anna Maria, a teacher. They banged on the outer doors just before dusk. I was in the old scriptorium, cleaning smoke residue from a fire-blackened manuscript when I heard the chapel bell toll. Sister Irina rang it twice for the outer gate, once if it was internal, twice if it was someone from the village. I came out to the entry hall, still holding my gloves in one hand, boots echoing off the limestone floor. By the time I reached the gate chamber, they'd already opened the outer portcullis. Nicolae was shouting, the wounded man moaning in some hoarse whisper I couldn't understand. "What happened?" I asked. Anna Maria looked at me with wild, tear-streaked eyes. "He was bitten by wolves," she said. It was strange. Wolves? This close to the village? They usually stay deeper in the hills. The man had what looked like deep gashes on his neck and shoulder. Dirty, ragged, oozing red, and something else. Something darker. Sister Irina was hesitant. She didn't want to bring him in, not without knowing more. But Nicolae insisted. "The doctor in the village is gone. The roads are blocked. We need help." Against better judgment, we let them carry him into the infirmary on the lower floor. Sister Antonia, who had worked as a nurse during the war in Bosnia, tended to him with old precision. She cleaned the wounds, stitched what she could, and gave him antibiotics from our modest emergency stash. He had no ID, no wallet, no phone, just the coat and the pants and a pack of Romanian Parliament cigarettes. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the slits in the bell tower, and something about the way he moaned, guttural, rhythmic, unnatural, echoed through the whole building like a distant drumbeat. The next morning, he was dead. At least, we thought he was. The monastery is laid out like a Templar keep, central nave, cloisters forming a square, crypt below, and the museum wing converted from what used to be the lay brothers' quarters. We only used certain sections in winter, too cold to heat the full complex. The dead man was laid out in the infirmary, wrapped in an old woolen sheet. No signs of breathing, no pulse. His skin had gone the color of candle wax. Sister Antonia had already begun preparing body for burial. In Orthodox tradition, there's a specific process, even for outsiders. She said she'd seen enough death in her life to know when someone was truly gone. But around noon, while I was in the south corridor photographing a restored mural, I heard screams. Not one, several. I ran, down the stairs, past the vestry, through the cloister. The infirmary door was open. Inside, Sister Antonia was on the ground, blood pooling beneath her veil. Her throat was torn open, as though bitten. The man, the supposed corpse, was crouched over her like a feral thing, his teeth red, eyes milky, face locked in a rictus of hunger. He looked up at me, made a gurgling noise, and lunged. I slammed the heavy oak door shut just in time, bolting it from the outside. The thud on the other side shook the wall. I ran to the chapel. The only phone was in the sacristy, a landline hooked up to a buried fiber cable that fed from the village below. No signal. No tone. Just dead air. "Someone cut the line," said Sister Irina when she found me there minutes later. I tried the emergency radio too. It's silent. We gathered everyone in the main refectory. There were 10 of us left. Myself, Sister Irina, the prioress, Sister Magdalena, the archivist, Brother Pavel, caretaker and groundsman, Ioana, a student volunteer from Cluj, Dr. Serban, a historian from Sibiu, Tomasz, a Polish preservation tech, and 3 nuns whose names I barely knew, quiet women who rarely left the cloister. We decided to seal the infirmary corridor entirely. Stone door, iron latch, and cold silence behind it. Dr. Serban said nothing during the meeting, just stood near the wall with his arms crossed. "Maybe he wasn't really dead," Tomasz said. "No," I told him. "I saw the body." "Then what the hell is he now?" No one answered. That night, strange noises echoed up through the crypt. Long, groaning sounds like heavy doors grinding open below the earth. The hill monastery sits on layers of older ruins. The main chapel was built atop an earlier foundation, likely pagan, later converted by Christian orders. Beneath the apse is a sealed burial vault. The crypt has always been off-limits, technically due to structural issues. But I'd been inside once, months before, with a local geologist. The air was cold, dry, and still. Now, it wasn't. I took a flashlight and went alone. Stupid, I know. But something about it felt personal, like the building itself was sick. The stone stairs curled down like a spine into darkness. Candles had long since burned out. I passed rows of medieval sarcophagi, iron rings still bolted to the walls. In the rear chamber, the air had changed. It stank, rot, fungal growth, and something else. Then I saw the stone lid. It had been pushed aside. The tomb of Abbot Gavril, sealed since 1641, was broken open. Inside was nothing. Just dust and a handprint. A human one, fresh. I left, ran up the stairs so fast I tripped and scraped my knee raw on the flagstones. That was 2 nights before the doors failed. The infection spread slow, unlike the movies. No one turned instantly. It took hours, sometimes a full day. First fever, then confusion, then violence. Brother Pavel was next. We found him slumped near the north wall, his hands covered in dried blood. He said nothing, just stared at the fire with dull, dead eyes. That night he disappeared. We locked every outer door with steel chain, sealed windows with beams, blocked the museum wing entirely. But something was already inside. Sister Magdalena, one of the calmest among us, began reciting psalms in Latin non-stop, even in her sleep. On the second morning, she gouged her own arm open with a broken ink quill, whispering, "He's in the walls. He's in the walls." We restrained her with cloth strips tied at the wrists and ankles, laid her down in the infirmary annex behind the sacristy, and covered the windows with blackout fabric. She thrashed intermittently, murmuring scripture so old even Sister Irina couldn't place it. We sedated her again, more carefully this time. But the whispers, those low, rhythmic whispers, did not stop. There was no fever, no infection, no biological explanation for what was happening to her. We took her temperature repeatedly, checked for bites or breaks, and tried to talk her down. Nothing worked. She wasn't violent, not like the others, just lost. Tomasz and I sat by her bed in shifts that night. We burned thick wax candles from the chapel, afraid the emergency lights might give out. The generator, an old diesel unit from the Ceausescu era, was never built for sustained winter use. We were running low on fuel, and the pipes had begun to groan with pressure changes. At some point near dawn, I fell asleep in my chair, candle dripping onto my coat. When I woke, Sister Magdalena was gone. The bindings were still tied, cleanly cut. A scalpel, or maybe a blade. On the mattress lay a single page from a 15th century psalter, torn from the restoration files. Written in red ink across the page, in neat, deliberate cursive, were 4 Latin words. Veritas claudit sub terra. The truth hides beneath the earth. I called for Tomasz, and we searched every accessible room. The chapel, the dormitories, the East Wing archive. We even broke the lock on the old bell tower, thinking she might have climbed up in a fugue. Nothing. She had vanished. It was Dr. Serban who suggested we check the crypt again. He and I went down armed, not with guns because there were none in the monastery, but with long iron candle holders repurposed as spears. They were heavy and poorly balanced, but they gave us a false sense of security. The crypt was colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeps through your gloves and into the small bones of your hands. The dust was disturbed, clear tracks in the sedimentary layer, as if someone had walked barefoot across centuries of settled stone. We followed them to the rear chamber. The tomb of Abbot Gavril remained open, lid fully displaced, and behind it, a new hole. A fissure in the stone wall, narrow and jagged, as though pressure from behind had broken it open. Not a natural collapse. Something had forced its way out. The tunnel beyond descended at a sharp angle, just wide enough for a person to crouch through. I shone my flashlight in. The beam caught old masonry, red brick and black mortar, but further down the bricks gave way to rock. Natural tunnel or early excavation, I couldn't say. The scent was overwhelming, mold, rot, and an alkaline sharpness like cleaning chemicals or dried blood. We didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, we sealed the crypt door from the outside, braced it with timbers pulled from the archive shelving. On the way back up, Serban remained silent. His jaw locked tight, gaze distant. It was only later that I realized he had recognized the words on the Psalter page, not just the Latin, but the handwriting. I confronted him that evening after supper. We sat in the scriptorium, the fire low, snow falling softly against the tall glass of the western windows. "She didn't write that page," I said. "Did she?" He hesitated before answering, then nodded. "No, that was mine." I stared at him, my pulse rising. "I found it in the archives weeks ago," he continued, "buried in a private letter from an abbess to the Patriarch of Alba Iulia. It spoke of a hidden passage beneath the crypt, one forbidden to the sisters, sealed by fire in the late 1600s. Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I thought it was just another myth, like the Black Abbey legend, or the whispers about the revenant monk." He rubbed his eyes. "You know how many of these places are built on older bones? Pagan caves, Roman ruins, early Christian tombs. I thought it was metaphor, some allegorical nonsense, until that man woke up after dying." I didn't reply. I couldn't. That night, the power went out. Without the generator, the emergency lighting failed within 10 minutes. We gathered in the chapel by candlelight, wrapping ourselves in thermal blankets and watching our breath curl into mist. Outside, the wind picked up, icy and erratic, rattling the leaded glass panes. We heard voices in it. Not clear speech, just fragments, moans, cries. Ioana screamed when she saw a figure standing in the cloister walkway, barefoot, hunched, backlit by lightning. Tomasz and I ran to the door, barred it, and reinforced the latch with a broken bench leg. Through the slit window, I saw her. Magdalena. She stood still, rain dripping from her hair, face tilted to the sky, lips moving without sound. Then she turned and walked directly into the darkness, disappearing behind a pillar. We didn't sleep. The next morning, footprints, bare, blood-slick, human, were found in the nave. There were only 7 of us left. Sister Irina called for prayer, not for salvation, but for clarity. She believed we had brought something up from the crypt, something that had waited beneath stone and relic for centuries. Serban believed it was viral, a disease, maybe even parasitic. He talked of Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, the zombie fungus that infects ants and compels them to climb before dying. He mentioned ancient bacteria locked in permafrost, reactivated by thaw. The monastery sits on a fault of limestone riddled with caves, he said. Caves that haven't seen sunlight in millennia. Something could have survived down there. We argued. Then Tomasz made a decision none of us agreed with. He went into the tunnel, said he would only be gone 15 minutes, just to see how deep it went. We begged him not to, he wouldn't listen, said we couldn't fight what we didn't understand. He took 2 flashlights, a backpack with water, and a kitchen knife. At the last minute, I gave him a crucifix from the chapel wall. It was old, cracked, carved from bog oak, more symbolic than defensive. But he nodded solemnly and kissed it before disappearing into the earth. The passage swallowed him like water takes a stone. The silence after he left was heavier than I expected. We all stood in the vestibule outside the crypt door for a long while, staring at the cracked stones where his flashlight beam had last flickered. Sister Irina led a short prayer, more to calm herself than to invoke protection, I think, and then we resealed the door behind him, dragging the archive shelves back into place. There was nothing else we could do. The next hours were hollow. The wind screamed louder that afternoon, and snow piled up against the courtyard arches, burying the tracks we'd left the day before. The fire in the chapel barely kept the frost at bay. I busied myself inspecting the museum wing, what little of it remained accessible. Many of the rooms had been shuttered, but the conservatory was still intact, filled with displays of medieval votives and reliquaries. Strange how glass and velvet-lined cases could still feel sacred in the middle of all that dread. I found Serban in the adjoining manuscript room. He had spread a dozen folios across the long oak table, most of them transcriptions of Benedictine records from the 17th century. There were references to burial rituals, exorcisms, even one passage describing a plague of the walking dead that had supposedly afflicted a nearby convent in 1683. I remember how methodically he traced the ink with his gloved hand. He wasn't frantic or obsessed, just resigned, as if he had already accepted that the monastery wasn't cursed, but merely a wound history never closed. Hours passed. Then the voice came. At first, it was muffled, a distant call, bouncing off the lower stone. We thought it might be the wind catching on the corridor gates, but then the words repeated. Polish, male, familiar. Zjedź na dół, zejdziesz na dół. Come down, come down. I didn't want to believe it was Tomasz. I remember Ioana clutching the edge of the staircase railing, lips trembling, whispering that it sounded wrong. It did. The cadence was off, slowed, guttural, as if something were trying to mimic his tone without understanding how speech works. I told myself it might be an echo, a malfunctioning radio relay, or some warped effect from the tunnel geometry, but I knew. We all did. No one said it out loud, but Tomasz was no longer the one speaking. That night, I took first watch in the chapel. The generator by then was down to fumes, and we had reverted to using oil lamps salvaged from the museum stock. I positioned them carefully, one by each door, one by the altar, and two along the choir loft steps. The flickering light played tricks in the stained glass, turning saints into shadows and beasts into angels. Sister Irina sat beside me, rosary in hand, her eyes closed but her lips moving in silent recitation. We heard scratching sometime past midnight. Not at the door, from inside the walls. It began as a soft scraping, like a rodent in an old beam, but it grew louder, deliberate, patterned, like fingers, slow drags of nails across stone. I held my breath and pressed my ear against the nave wall beneath the icon of St. Michael. The sound was real, moving upward. Not fast, not frantic, just steady, as if something were exploring, learning the interior like a blind animal feeling its way through unfamiliar ribs. Then it stopped. We didn't sleep after that. By morning, we had lost Ioana. Her bed was cold, her boots were gone. The western door, despite being chained and bolted, was ajar by barely 2 fingers. We scoured the entire complex. Serban and I found only her scarf snagged on the southern cloister railing, torn in 2, threads stuck in the mortar. Outside, the snow had been disturbed. A wide trail, not footprints but more like a dragged trench, led around the outer wall and vanished into the pine wood. We knew what it meant, though none of us said the word. The monastery was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a net, and something inside was fishing. I went back to the crypt the next evening, alone this time. I didn't tell the others. I didn't plan it. I just needed to see. I brought 2 lamps, extra oil, and a crowbar. The stone steps descended into darkness with familiar creaks. The air had that same humid sourness, like breath in a cave. The timbers we'd nailed across the tomb passage were still there, but something had gnawed at them. Not broken, not clawed, gnawed, like teeth on soft pine. I removed the beams, one by one, slowly, carefully. The passage beyond the tomb was colder now, and my lamplight seemed to reach less distance than before. The walls were wet, not damp, wet, as though water had started bleeding through them from deep below. I moved slowly, marking the path with the chalk on the bricks where possible. I only intended to go 20 meters, just enough to see what lay ahead. I made it 50 before I saw the door. It was wood, swollen with moisture, bound in iron, set into the stone as if placed there to keep something in, not out. A rusted emblem in the center caught my light. 2 intersecting circles with a sword through the middle. Not a cross, a blade. Some old monastic sigil I'd never seen before. The hinges were fractured. Not forced open, but melted. As if something corrosive had eaten through them. I didn't touch the door. I listened. Behind it, I could hear breathing. Not one person. Several. Breathing in rhythm. Short, shallow, uneven, and then whispering. Romanian, I think, but not any dialect I recognized. Ancient, half-intelligible, like the prayer chant recordings in the museum's 13th century audio archive. Layered voices, male and female, child and elder, all speaking at once. Then something touched the back of my neck. I turned. No one was there. Just air, heavy and warm, like lungs exhaling in stone. I dropped the lamp, it shattered. Flames caught briefly on the damp floor, sputtered, then died. I ran. I didn't look back. Back in the main hall, I told them what I'd seen. This time, Serban didn't question it. He said the door I described matched one found in certain early Templar fortifications in the Levant, the kind used to mark plague vaults or ossuaries for excommunication. Doors not to be opened without the permission of a bishop or the king. Doors for sealing what should not be remembered. Irina went pale. "I think it was the original vault," she said softly. "The first crypt, from before the Christian monks arrived." None of us responded. By then, we were all starting to see them. Not clearly, always at the edge of the hall or through the fogged chapel glass. Shadows moving too slowly to be human. Pale faces watching from rooftops, arms limp, mouths slightly open. They didn't attack. Not yet. They waited. It was the waiting that broke us. The kind of patient anticipation that only a predator shows when it knows escape is impossible. For 3 days, they encircled the monastery without moving in. Sometimes they would vanish for hours, retreating beyond the tree line, giving us false hope. Then we'd catch glimpses of them again, reflected in stained glass or crouched behind crumbled walls, always watching, as if measuring us, cataloging our patterns, learning how to breach a structure designed by centuries of masons and monks. Inside, we rationed food and oil, sleeping in shifts, always in pairs, never alone. Sister Irina began reciting scripture constantly now, not from fear, but conviction. She believed what we were experiencing was older than disease, older than man. She carried her breviary everywhere, even to the latrine, fingers blistered from candle flame and rosary beads, her voice hoarse from repetition. Serban and I alternated between disbelief and grim acceptance. We were past theories, past science, past anything that could be measured. We were inside something now, a system, a memory. It was during one of the colder nights, when frost formed inside the chapel itself, that we heard the first real breach. It came from the east side. Near the museum wing we'd sealed with oak beams and steel cable. The initial sound was quiet, the slow grind of stone against stone, as if a section of wall were shifting. But then came the impact. Something slamming into the interior support arch. Again and again, with a rhythm that wasn't chaotic. It was deliberate, like battering from something that understood leverage. The fifth strike cracked one of the ancient vault ribs. A fine dust rained down. We gathered our few defensive tools, crowbars, metal candlesticks, sharpened chisels, and moved toward the noise. I could feel them through the wall before I saw them. I don't know how else to say it. Like cold pressure on the bones behind my eyes. When the breach finally happened, it was quiet, anticlimactic. A small section of ancient mortar gave way with a wet snap, and a pale hand reached through, grasping the air like a blind swimmer. Serban struck it with the iron censer from the altar. Bone cracked. The hand withdrew, but not in pain, more like confusion. Then another arm came through and another. Not frenzied, not grabbing, just pushing, probing, testing the width of the opening like a dog sniffing beneath a door. We sealed it again with crates and old masonry blocks, but it was temporary. Every hour we delayed, they grew bolder. The snowstorm that followed should have saved us. For one day and one night, the whiteout blanketed everything. Visibility was nil. The temperature dropped to minus 20 Celsius. But instead of freezing them, the cold seemed to preserve them, make them harder, less human. The next breach came from the bell tower. We'd thought it too high, too narrow, too structurally unsound for climbing. But something had made it up. At dawn, the bells began ringing, wild, off-tempo, erratic. They hadn't moved in years. Their ropes were sealed beneath the flooring after the 2012 earthquake, yet there they were, swinging, their tones echoing across the valley like a final call to prayer. Serban and I climbed the narrow stairwell, each step a test of courage. The cold was unbearable. We reached the belfry and found no one inside. No figures, no ropes, nothing, just wind. And yet the largest bell, Sanctus Petrus, cast in 1544, was still swaying gently. When we approached it, Serban stopped abruptly, knelt, and touched the inside of the bell's bronze curve. His fingers came away red, not blood, rust-colored dust, thick and moist, like ground bone. Beneath the bell, someone had drawn a symbol with it, not with a brush or finger, with their tongue. I recognized the same sigil I had seen on the underground door, 2 intersecting circles with the sword running through the center. This time, it had additional marks, radiating lines, smaller glyphs surrounding it like protective runes or a containment ward. But they were drawn wrong. One line was incomplete, another reversed, and I understood then someone had tried to use the bell as a warding point, to seal something in or out, but the pattern had been sabotaged. By whom, I still don't know. Sister Irina was gone when we returned. We found her note in the chapel pew, written on parchment from a 17th century sermon ledger. She wrote only one sentence: "I go to make confession to the earth." Her breviary was left open on the altar to Psalm 91, the passage about plague and protection. We knew what it meant. She had gone down to the tunnel. That left 3 of us, myself, Serban, and Magdalena, if she could still be called that. We hadn't seen her since the night in the snow, but we knew she was near. Sometimes we would hear humming in the walls, sometimes footsteps. Once, I found a lock of her hair braided into the curtain cord beside my bed. That evening, we made a decision. Not because we thought we could escape, we knew there was no escape. But we had to understand what was buried beneath the monastery, what the monks had sealed off all those centuries ago, what had waited in darkness for history to forget. We took lanterns, our remaining tools, and descended into the crypt. The tunnel mouth was wide open. The wooden beams Tomasz had placed were torn aside. Not broken, not splintered, removed, with care. The sigils around the tomb had been redrawn in ash, this time perfectly. I don't know who did it. The passage down felt longer than before. The air was thick, metallic, as if we were breathing inside a lung made of stone. We reached the iron-bound door. The sword sigil was still visible. This time we pushed it open. Inside lay a cavern, natural but altered. Bones lined the walls in the style of ossuaries, but these bones were not placed in patterns. They were jammed into crevices, embedded into rock, as though something had expelled them from the earth like teeth from a shattered jaw. At the center stood a raised platform, circular, ringed with salt and soot, a stone slab resting atop it, not a coffin, an altar. Sister Irina was there. She stood facing the slab, hands clasped, veil removed. Her skin had turned pale blue in the cold, her lips cracked from prayer. As we stepped into the chamber, she turned and said something I'll never forget. It needed memory to return. It needed us to remember. Then she collapsed. We rushed to her, but it was too late. She hadn't been harmed, just emptied. As if whatever had weighted down here had taken from her not blood or flesh, but her last breath of meaning. And then we saw it. Not a creature, not even a body, a presence. The altar began to shake. Dust rose. and from beneath it we heard the sound of nails scraping stone, not random, not chaotic, but coordinated. Rhythmic, like a ritual knocking. Serban backed away. I didn't. I stepped closer. I had to see. When the slab cracked, the light from our lanterns dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, as if they were losing the will to burn. From the crack, a hand emerged, pale, desiccated, bound with prayer cords that had long since rotted away. It wasn't Tomasz. It wasn't anyone we had known. It was older. It wore the vestments of a bishop, but no bishop ever wore that smile. I remember screaming, not in fear, in grief, because I understood. The infection didn't begin with the man at the gate. It began centuries ago, buried, bound, worshipped by those too afraid to destroy it. The villagers didn't bring the plague. We summoned it, with memory, with our restoration, with our desire to reveal the past without respecting its silence. I don't know how I escaped the crypt. I remember Serban dragging me by the coat, our lanterns dying, the passage behind us collapsing as if rejecting us like antibodies. By the time we sealed the stone door with mortar and iron and blessed it in every tongue we knew, dawn had broken. We sat in the snow, quiet, numb, alive. The monastery still stands. I don't know for how long, but the shadows are watching again, not moving, just waiting. And in the wind, faint and low, a voice still calls. Veritas claudit sub terra. The truth hides beneath the earth. And we were the fools who dug. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.